guys, Wolvie here. This is part 3 of the 3-parter for the channel. The usual disclaimer applies. Any opinion here is mine and mine alone. So a couple of things here and there before I get into the meat and potatoes of this particular video. So I've made, believe it or not, 2 prior attempts to get something going for the part 3. The first attempt, it was already filmed. Then a few days went by and I realized I left out some very important information. So I had to scrap attempt number 1. Attempt number 2, I was in the middle of recording it earlier today, believe it or not. And unfortunately, what ruined it was a quote-unquote phone call from a bit of a scammer. So I had to decline that and stop recording right then and there because it's like it would have ruined the video entirely. So this is attempt number 3. No pun intended. So when it comes to information in the description below, what I'm probably going to do is that I'm going to post a video with certain, channel names, all that stuff first. And then I'm going to go back to edit it after it's posted, add in specific videos. That way things are as smooth as possible. So when it comes to varying links to specific videos, specific YouTube videos, that's helped me, with my particular builds. And yes, there are 3 of them. Again, no pun intended. Now, I'll also include channel names of channels where it's like either I got reminiscence of some stuff that I've learned along the way with my builds, or key tips in sense of the wiring or whatever, as well as channel names where it's the people that's really helped me along the way. Now, in addition to all that, the meat and potatoes of this particular video is as follows. Some of the useful items I have, which people should have when they tackle PC building. I'm going to mention videos where it's pertaining to a part of a build where it's okay, I screwed up. Thank you for reminding me. And I'm going to mention towards the end items I still need to finish up my streaming area. And by area, I have 2. One of them is here in my bedroom, the other is in my living room. And neither of them are done. Because there are things I still need. So, without any further delay, we're now going to go into some of the items that are going to be your BFFs when it comes to PC building. What items do you need and why they are important? So, I'm going to go back and forth between this photo, that one. There's going to be these 3 photos. I'm going to go back and forth between these 3 because these have quite a few of the items that are going to be your best friend. There is one item I did not include in this video, but it'll be very, very helpful. And I'll explain why when I get to it. So you notice here this first photo of the 3 is that these are several of the items you're going to be needing in your possession when you do PC building. Now, the microfiber cloth, these are reusable when it comes down to wiping things down, and especially with tempered glass after you're done with the builds, all that stuff. Or it's really useful to have something reusable around, but it's also not a bad idea to have something disposable like paper towels or shop towels in place. So if you have both, that is ideal because let's just say, you need paper towels for something and you just happen to run out, but you have these microfiber cloths in hand. And the reason why it's good to have both is you have some format of a backup in place. Now, another item you're going to need is Windex. And granted, this is a generic version at Walmart, and I live close to a Walmart. The reason why having Windex is really, really good is, again, the tempered glass. So it removes your, the fingerprints on the tempered glass, whether it be yours or somebody else's. Now, one thing I do want to mention here, and I do have a bit of a slight correction, mid-filming, so it's not just one item that I forgot to mention here, it's at least 3. Again, no pun intended. So the first item that I forgot to put in this photo that I should have brought up are anti-static gloves. These kind of help in the sense of reducing fingerprints on tempered glass and other parts where it's the fingerprints kind of make it look icky. So that is something really valuable to have. And even better if it's in your size. So with that bit out of the way, now we're going to go into some of the other items in this particular photo that's very, very useful. Now, one of the other useful items to have is, believe it or not, compressed air. Whether it be in a can or a reusable like mechanism that does the same job. Now, I actually do have a reusable version of compressed air. I also have this can here, you know, just for purposes of the video. Instead of like having it around, you know, readily available to make sure your PC builds run at their best and they stay cool. Now, another item to have on hand, and you may not be able to see it that well, it's the toothpicks. You're kind of wondering why toothpicks. Now, when it comes down to quote-unquote pins on the motherboard, if some of them somehow, you know, are bent or it's like slightly bent, you can actually use a toothpick, and I'll reveal the item in a little bit more detail in a moment. Like an anti-static bracelet. It's like if you have like that combination around, like the anti-static bracelet and your toothpick to help maneuver the pin to where it's as straight as it was, that becomes your best friend right in that regard. Now, a couple other items here, you know, you may see some of it, you may not. Now, one of them, I'm going to put this camera down here, I'm going to point to it. It's actually the headlamp. The headlamp is probably going to be one of your most critical items to have, especially if you're not getting any help on your build. The reason why a headlamp, you know, is extremely crucial if you're a one-person show with your PC builds is because it frees up your hands. That way you don't have to worry about like having the flashlight in one hand and trying to screw something down with the other. Having a headlamp available, it will free up the hands where you can do the build safely and reduction of cuts. Now, I'm going to get out of here a little bit. Now, I'm going to cover this up somewhat. And right here, what I'm pointing to is like it's a knockoff iFixit kit. Greg Salazar has mentioned this in his PCDC videos. This is something I'm very fortunate to have invested in because guess what? This will help with your builds. Some components may come with the screwdriver sorts, some may not. But having this is extremely helpful because there are certain components where the screwdrivers you're given that's tied to certain components may be too big or too small. And having a knockoff iFixit or a proper iFixit will help immensely. Now, I'm going to try to do this as best I can. And it's one of those you're not going to see. You see it very barely in this photo. And that is a screw kit. Well, what type of screws you might be wondering? It's like spares of varying types of screws. Whether it be spare standoff screws, spare chases screws, spare chases fan screws, so on and so forth. Having like something like this is helpful in the event where you run out of screws and that through no fault of your own and you need backups. And this has helped me on all three of my builds in a massive way. I cannot be more grateful than that. Now for the final piece of this particular photo, and Q-tips is another item where it's like you might want to have on hand. And it's down in this photo. I actually have some here in my apartment. Now, we're going to talk about rubbing alcohol. I'm not the world's best at pronouncing things. So, it's isopropyl alcohol, and it's at 91%. So, if it's in the 90s, you're in excellent condition. And the reason why this is quite useful is because if you put way too much thermal paste, I'll get to that in a minute. This like helps with like the cleaning, or if you're trying to reapply, you know, like getting rid of the old application of the thermal paste and applying the new one. You're going to need this to, you know, to wipe it off. And then it comes in hand with stuff like the microfiber cloths or disposable paper towels and so on and so forth. Now, speaking of thermal paste, you might as well have like at least a tube or two of this on hand. Because of a few things. Some CPU coolers will not, I repeat, will not have any form of thermal paste that comes with the cooler. And having a tube of your own on hand will be a massive lifesaver. With all three of my builds, I'm going to go into this right now. This is the Arctic MX4 thermal compound. This is among the very best when it comes to thermal paste when you apply it to your CPU and you put the cooler above it. And the reason why this is one of the very best because it does what it says it does. And like I said, I have this on all three of my builds. Now, another reason why to have the thermal compound like separately on hand is because on top of the whole aspect of that possibility where the CPU cooler does not have any format of thermal compound like in the box or pre-applied, it could be that the pre-applied thermal paste might not be strong enough for that CPU. So if you do that wipe down of the copper side of the cooler, and again, you want to use, the isopropyl, the rubbing alcohol and the paper towel, shop towels. You wipe that off really good. Then you do that, applying with that. And when it comes down to applying the thermal paste, it's very much no bigger than the size of a pea that you eat. PEA. So, again, you want to have like at least a tube or two of thermal paste on hand for those reasons, whether it be the CPU cooler not coming with any format of thermal compound on it at all, whether it be like a tube of that brand or pre-applied on the cooler itself, or if the pre-applied thermal paste isn't going to be enough. Now, a couple of other items you're going to have for PC building are at least 2 flash drives. One for the BIOS, and that's tied to your motherboard. And the other, if you're planning on using Windows as your operating server, you need to have a second flash drive meant for the Windows Media Creation tool. Now, this is crucial for the latter because when it comes to, you do all the necessary steps to make sure everything's up and running for the build, but you need an operating server to take it further. And by taking it further, getting on the web and any other applicable programs. So by having at least 2 flash drives makes or breaks the entire build, in my personal opinion. One flash drive formatted in FAT32. The FAT32 format for that particular flash drive, so that's one flash drive. The second is especially if you're using Windows as your operating server. With the second flash drive having the Windows Media Creation tool. Okay, so I am back. So just to do a quick recap of 3 items in the photos that I did not catch, but you're going to want to have on hand. One being Q-tips for the reasons of, to help get into like the thinner, like the harder reach areas with rubbing alcohol. The second being anti-static gloves. And the third being anti-static bracelets to help with the toothpicks, that sort of thing. Now, another item to have on hand, and this kind of keeps the builds that itself like quote-unquote grounded so you don't get shocked or electrocuted, is, and I actually have to cover up Deadpool here for a moment, and to recap, I do name my build, so that way it gives me a bigger incentive to take good care of them. I'm going to point to it, and it's actually an anti-static mat. This kind of helps, keep everything grounded. It helps prevent you from getting shocked / electrocuted. I love this. This is an actual iFixit anti-static mat, and this has helped me loads. It's just a true godsend in my personal opinion. So on that note, I'm going to go over certain tips, that's helped me, regarding like the builds themselves. And basically, everything else you can think of me saying here. So this is Deadpool. This is actually the easiest build of the three that I've done. The reason why, and the main reason being, is that it's quite minimalistic. I only have, when it comes to storage, I only have 3 total for this particular build. 2 of them being NVMe, the other being a SATA 3 SSD. This is a grand total of 4 terabytes of storage, 32 gigabytes on the RAM. And the more minimalistic a build is, the easier it is. And when it comes to varying like sizes of motherboards and other things, it's like excuse me, I just don't like having the NVMe's being completely empty or have everything on a single storage drive. The reason why I don't like things on a single storage drive because of the saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And it kind of rings, I would say it kind of rings true. It definitely rings true when it comes to PC building. You don't want to put everything on a singular storage drive. Because if something happens and your computer can't function, can't even operate, you're kind of putting yourself in an SOL position. And by that, you're going to have to, buy newer and more components just to get things back the way they were before the crash. So for me, I would rather have at least 2 storage drives, if not 3. Because that way I can have one drive, have my operating server and the more important aspects of the build. Whereas I have the other 2 drives where it's like they serve as just storage. I don't have to worry about like certain aspects, if that makes any sense. Now, this is also my cleanest build of the 3 because it's like, again, due to that minimalism, I just don't have like, worry about like, okay, am I going to have enough room to, cable manage, that sort of thing. Now, when it comes to varying builds, you have to pay attention to your chassis because if you can modify certain aspects for it, then go for it. Especially if you want to modify. And for this particular chassis for Deadpool, it is a micro ATX. And by that, it only fits 2 specific motherboards, the mini ITX and the micro ATX Max. And for this one, I went with a micro ATX because I don't like having that much space between the bottom of the motherboard and like the area where the power supply unit is. So it's like I went with that, and I'm like, that was a really good decision on my behalf that I've made. And then also I do want to point out with this particular build, there is an area, it's like I have to kind of, let me see here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to cover parts of this Deadpool again, so that way I can point certain locations on this. So, where I'm pointing at here, there was, like an area where I could insert, like, additional hard disk drive, SATA 3 solid state drives there, like, via a tray. But I actually, like, unscrewed that entire tray. So that way I have more room, to like shove cables there, make sure things look clean. So if your chassis has that capability where you can remove it to quote unquote modify it, and you really want to modify it like that, go for it. You're going to be thanking yourself later because you've freed up the room, to shove cables in there, and you don't have to worry as much about cable management. Now, I do want to add here that with this particular CPU cooler, it is by Scythe. It's the Big Shuriken 3. I actually spray painted the fan of this particular cooler, and it made it look even better. And then also to keep in mind, I do have a heatsink on top of that NVMe that is a heatsink. It's like a very like a minimalistic like type. So always have like stuff like that on hand. So that way, again, your your components perform at their best. Okay, let me see something. Where is my... Hold on a second, folks. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to go over here to Raiden. Now this is, unlike Deadpool and unlike Odin, Raiden is actually my gaming only build. Meaning that it's going to have like, once I get done with the software aspect of it, it's probably going to have programs where I stream on it and I'm just gaming. Now, I do want to point out a couple of things here. So, when you look at this, take this photo with a grain of salt, because I actually did make a change. And to be more specific, I'm going to point to the change I made. So, if you look at the fans of this photo, I actually changed the orientation of the two that I'm pointing at. And the two I'm pointing at, I actually had these in the wrong direction when I took this photo. But I didn't quite realize it until I saw a video by Chrissyx Jonez. I've caught a few of her videos, and she's an absolute riot. I love her. Go subscribe to her if you haven't had it yet. But in her one of her videos, I should say, and she did a video solely on the fact of that some of her PC fans were facing the wrong direction. So I remember seeing that video and I'm like, holy shit, I think I have a couple of my fans in Raiden facing the wrong direction. And I was able to, quickly, change the orientation to the correct way. And I saw her video and I'm like, I was laughing my ass off mentally. And I do have to thank her for that video where it's like, because it reminded me, I'm like, okay, you might want to check the direction of your fans before, really doing whatever you want with it. So, I do have to be grateful for a video like that, because in that particular video was a follow-up to her first PC build. So, it's one of those things that, yeah. And then you'll notice here and in Odin, I do have a toy inside the build. That's just me. You can hate, but hey. That's just how I am. I just do not like my builds being too plain. Now, I do want to add here for Raiden, and then I'm gonna be doing some degree of emphasis on the cooler. When it comes to some CPUs, you can get away with an air cooler. In this case, for Raiden, the reason why I have Raiden like this, where it's only the fans that are RGBs, because I wanted the gaming-only build to not have as much RGB as the rest of my builds. So I'm really grateful, to have gone the... Forgive me on that one, but when it comes to the cooler here in question, I'm glad to have gone the route not to it. It's like I was really indecisive on the cooler for a long time. And what I did with this particular cooler setup is that it's the Chromax. And you'll see here that I have two fans to a single heat sink. One that's quote unquote on the intake, and then the other being on the exhaust. And the thing is, with this particular cooler, you can have it set up like this. And when it comes to the CPU I have in Raiden, which is the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X, you can get away with this particular setup in the sense of your cooler, where it's where it comes with a single fan and the single heatsink. You can add the second fan to it. And what you need to have on hand is a two-way PWM splitter cable. So that way both of the fans, can do what's it's supposed to do on a single CPU air cooler. But another thing I do want to point out with Raiden is that I'm going to take this down a little bit. Or better yet, do some quote-unquote cover-up. Is that, no pun intended for covering up the toy, but right down there, the reason why I have a Wi-Fi card in it is because for this particular motherboard, which is the Asus Asus Republic of Gamers Strix X570F. Yes, there's more than one type in the X570 family of motherboards. So the X570F does not, I repeat, does not have the Wi-Fi capabilities on that motherboard. X570E does have the Wi-Fi capabilities. X570F does not. So for me, it's like, I was thinking about this for a little while. I'm like, how do I approach this particular situation? And it came down to having a Wi-Fi card installed. Now, where this is in my living room as opposed to where my modem/router is, I mean, I could have gone, the Ethernet cable, but I like things looking clean in my living room, so I'm like, okay, let me go after a Wi-Fi card for it instead. And I'm glad to have gone that route. Because with the gaming only build I have here being 100% SSD, it's like, this build goes quite fast. 7 terabyte total. And for those people who want to get to know me a little bit, I like to have more storage. Because the more storage for me, the less I have to worry about things, like cramming up. If that makes any sense. But yeah, this particular Wi-Fi card is by TP-Link. It's one of the better brands of Wi-Fi cards in my personal opinion. And it's something, if you go to Amazon to grab it, or even a Micro Center if you live near one, that's perhaps your best bet alongside of Best Buy. Now, this is my workhorse, Odin. Now, like Raiden, I have a toy in here. And this particular toy, like the one in Raiden, I actually found that off of eBay, just a little FYI. Now, with this particular build, for right now, I am done with it because I have, everything is laid up as best I could without me trying to rage quit. Now, I do want to emphasize on the aspect, like I said in Raiden, that Raiden has a Wi-Fi card in it because it does not have the Wi-Fi capabilities innate on the motherboard. This particular motherboard I do have the X570E. This one does have that Wi-Fi innately with the motherboard. Now, for this particular one, I actually have a sound card on it because it's I'm one of those types of people, badass sound all the way. Now, I do want to point out, though, and I forgot to mention this sooner, that I don't know how I'm going to be able to, let me see if I can pull this up, being creative with it. So, I'm going to focus a little bit on that little quote-unquote stick you see right over there. That is a graphics card support bracket of sorts. I don't know why my right hand tried to do some nonsense like that, but as I was trying to say, that is a graphics card support bracket that's from Amazon. It's about, I think when I bought it was about $8 United States. It might be $9 United States dollars at this moment in time. But it's one of those things I really like to have in my builds because it's when it comes to the longevity of the components, having that sag is for me, I'm not a fan of the sag. And having something like that support bracket that's less than $10, holding it up like a champ, I would rather have my components last a long time. Because it's replacing certain components for before I need to, it's I'm wasting more money. And for me, it's having a support bracket, helps, preserve the life of that motherboard. And I'd rather have that preservation, so I don't buy as many, as opposed to having the sag there and I may have to replace it in 2 years. But that's just my personal opinion on the matter. Now, when it comes to cameras, and this is the section I'm going to start off with this. Now, with this particular digital camera, it does kickstart off a section of the items I still need to complete my streaming setups instead of the streaming areas. Now, this particular camera, it's the Canon PowerShot ELP H180. Granted, it's not a bad camera. However, if I really want to, get serious in the sense of, like, putting things onto YouTube with, like, video editing, all that stuff, I know this is not going to be enough. So what I'm still going to be needing for both streaming areas is a secondary camera. I am leaning towards a GoPro or a better Canon camera, if that makes any sense. And I'm going to need 2 of these. And to be more specific, something with more memory in it. Now, on top of that, I do need another laptop. Now, I used to have a laptop for about 5 years, but I'm one of those people where it's like, there comes a time where I need to replace it. So, the reason why I did 3 builds, including Deadpool, was to eventually replace that laptop. So, granted, I'm going to be running everything on desktop, but it's like I need a laptop, and specifically one with like an SD slot, so where once I do some videos onto YouTube, onto the channel, I can actually edit it somewhat. Forgive me. So that's just one of the things I needed. So I do need a couple of digital cameras. I'm leaning towards GoPro, and one of the reasons, they do it like they do. I hear so many good things about them. Now, another reason is that it ties into what I need next, is that GoPro is one of the brands of cameras that's compatible with the Stream Deck by Elgato. Now, I do not have a Stream Deck at all, and I need 2 of them. The mini version for the streaming area where Deadpool is, as well as like a regular like Stream Deck where Odin and Raiden are. So if I have like, compatible equipment, things are going to be a lot smoother for me. So for me, it's just like having 2 Stream Decks, 1 regular, 1 mini, alongside 2 GoPro cameras or other brands that are compatible with Elgato's Stream Decks. Now, speaking of Elgato, another item I'm going to be needing is, oddly enough, a second capture card. And more specifically, an external one. Now, I have one in my living room for the main streaming area, but I don't have one in the bedroom for the backup. Now, another item I know I'm going to be needing, besides all that, is a second portable monitor. Now, portable monitors, I recently landed one from Newegg and the brand's MSI, so it's more like I need to, really, tweak it, if that makes any sense. So, I have a portable monitor in my bedroom, but not one in my living room. And pertaining to the one in my, to the capture card in my living room, I do need a portable monitor for that output tied to that. But I do need a secondary, capture card for my bedroom. Now, when it comes down to the HDMI matrix, I'm fortunate not to have 2 of those, so I'm set in that regard. So, I'll be back, because I do need a moment or 2 to think things over. Now, there is furniture I am more than likely going to be needing, so one of them is going to be, another gaming chair for my bedroom, because, the one that's in here now, I mean, it very likely is running on its last legs. I bought it, I want to say, close to 2 years ago. So it's something I may need to replace pretty soon. The desk might be it's pretty recent that I bought it, but I'm probably going to be, replacing it with a 60-inch desk and get, like, small cabinet underneath, I have not decided on the desk yet, but the chair I'm more than likely going to have to replace by the end of the year. Also, pertaining to Odin, I might be switching a small portion of the storage. And the storage is going to be where my camera is, like, leaning towards, because for this particular chases, some of the hard disk drive storage, or as well as the SSD, is towards the front of the chases, so probably going to be replacing the 2TB hard disk drive I have in there now with about 2 to 4TB SATA 3 SSD in that particular spot. I have not decided on that yet. Now, I do want to mention here with Odin here, I actually replaced all the Chase's fans you see here. And that's because, the PWM aspect was working perfectly fine. But the RGB aspect of it was not. And again, that's a different story for a different day. All in all, I mean, there's some advice I would give to people who are building their PCs for the first time. I mean, first and foremost, take your time. And then another thing is like Greg Salazar, Graphically Challenged. That's one other individual who has helped me in the sense of keeping your eyes on pricing trends and as well as availability with varying components. Because if you're aware of that, you know when it's a good time to go after certain components. And when it's a bad time to go after it. And so that's one piece of advice, Take your time, know your trends, know your financial situation. If you're willing to pay a scalper for a certain component, then go for it. And I say that from personal experience. But if you can, do not try to not overspend. But it comes down to your individual financial situation all along. Now, another piece of advice, I wouldn't say advice, but it is a tip, is that you can get away with buying your parts in increments. You don't have to go after everything at the same time if you are able to do so. The reason being, again, it's about knowing your trends, knowing your financial situation. Now, another thing that, I found very helpful is that you don't have to build the entire PC in one single go. Meaning that if you have, just the chases and, let's say maybe a few of the parts, like the CPU, the cooler, RAM, and just your NVMe drive, you can get away with let me repeat that. So if you have your motherboard, RAM, CPU cooler, whether it be Air or AIO, if you have certain parts but not everything, you can get away with tackling that portion at first, and then go after the rest when you get those parts at a later date. And that's because you can actually get yourself ready for some of the difficult parts when you can. And the thing is with the motherboard, once you put that into the chases, what I found particularly helpful is that if you could get some of the wiring and once you get that motherboard into the chases, it's that's going to save you a lot of headaches. And what I mean by this is that let's just say you have everything onto the motherboard, both of your NVMe drives installed, CPU, the bases of the cooler, your RAM, and you have let's just say you have an AIO cooler, whether it be 120, 240, 360, or similar, and then your parts of the cooler is on the chases already. You have your standoffs in place, all that stuff, as well as your chases fans. If you get that portion done, by the time you get the motherboard with everything on it installed, and you go after the wiring and more specifically the stuff at the very bottom of the motherboard, you have saved yourself a lot of headaches. You really have, because it's you don't have to worry about where certain cables go. But it's if you take care of that part one point, and then another day it's you want to make sure the power supply unit's installed correctly, and then the graphics card shows up, and then you get that in last. And then another thing is that when it comes down to cable management, it's like there's no really one way to like go about that. Because some people will say, don't cable manage until everything is working. And then others will say, cable manage as you go along. The reason why there's no really one way in that department, in my personal opinion, is because, again, it comes down to how you like your confidence level, because no two people have the same exact confidence level. And now, one other item, that's just, and this is me personally, I don't know how many others do this, is that not every situation is where you can install the graphics card before your CPU. And I'm going to show you guys Deadpool right over here. Now, with Deadpool, I do want to share a story on that particular build, is that I actually installed the graphics card before the CPU. Now, you're kind of wondering, that's not the way you go about it. Now, the reason why I was able to get away with it is because I had both of my NVMe drives installed ready to go ahead of time. And by having my NVMe drives like installed ready to go, and I was able to get to my graphics card, get that, installed on all that good stuff, is that it freed me up space. And then another thing is that I actually had the foundation of the cooler like in play, meaning that in my case it's the Skytha Big Shuriken 3. Is that I had the base part of the cooler like already in place, so it's like all I had to do was just once I got my CPU against the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X, once I get that CPU, I could just put the CPU into the socket and then install the cooler, because, again, I had the bases of the cooler already in place. I have everything below the CPU in play, and I'm like, bada bing, bada boom. It's like, and by that, it's like a walk in the park. And then the thing is, when it comes to the cleanliness of the builds, not so much, it's not on the dust, but more so how it looks the cable managing. It's it's your build, your rules. If you want the build looking really nice, you might want to spend some time on cable management. But if you really don't care about it, you can leave it messy. It's entirely up to you. The most important thing is you have fun building it. And that's all I really have to say. So when it comes to the future videos, I honestly don't know when they're going to be filmed and or posted. I do have a first impressions coming up, and it's on the Sailor Moon sodas. So that's going to be the next video. And I've already tried one of the flavors, so that's all I'm going to say on that. So I am done with this particular video. So with Wolvie here, signing off, I will catch you all on the flip side.